Hey, this is Jason Kleberg from the Force 5 podcast, a show that forces a guest to come up with a movie-themed top 5 list topic, and then we reveal our picks on air. Top 5 heist films, top 5 tearjerkers, top 5 movie dogs. Every show you'll be asking yourself, what would be on my list? Guests include directors, screenwriters, actors, podcasters, musicians, authors, and even a professional wrestler. Subscribe to the Force 5 podcast, and you won't just be a listener, you'll be a list nerd. The Force 5 podcast, available wherever you're listening now.
Do you love movies? So do I. What's up, y'all? It's KB, and I love movies, inviting you to listen to The Conversation, a film podcast where passion meets perspective and opinion. From the old school to the new, I invite a guest on to discuss the movies that thrill us, challenge us, break our hearts, or even blow our minds. There's always new episodes dropping wherever you get your podcasts. So join the conversation. We don't just watch movies. We love talking about them too. The Conversation with KB Loves Movies, a part of Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Welcome to Wake Up Heavy, the world's greatest horror movie podcast.
Hello, and welcome back to Wake Up Heavy, Recollections of Horror. This is Mark Begley, your host, and today I'm recording a follow-up episode to last week's show because I had an interesting discovery, and I thought about just tacking this on to whatever was going to be the next episode, but I figured I'd go ahead and indulge myself and create a relatively short episode, hopefully. Since this is the pandemic year, we can all do with a little indulging of ourselves. And I mean, I guess this whole f***ing show that I do is indulgent, as are most podcasts. But I had an interesting encounter on Twitter that led me down a quick little rabbit hole that answered a question that I posed on the last episode. So here's a little reminder of what went down last time.
Previously on Wake Up Heavy.
One of the guys that was in a lot of these movies that I watched. And there was one in particular, and again, I don't know if this is an actual memory or something that I created in my brain.
Smooth brain.
But it was a ninja film, and there were a bunch up in a tree, probably doing the wire stuff that became so prominent. And another guy was down below and had a long spear, and he was poking it up in the tree. And my memory has it being that he poked somebody in the leg, and that person, it was like their tendons or their muscles were coming out. Maybe he stabbed him in the stomach and it was their guts, but I just remember some kind of viscera coming down as this person strained to stay up in the tree.
That doesn't sound right.
And thinking, wow, they left this in, and this is really kind of disgusting and amazing, and I wouldn't have any idea where to search for trying to find that film again. But of course, the dubbing kind of got me used to that whole idea. So I was strolling through Twitter the other day, as one does when one is supposed to actually be working their day job, and I came across a couple of tweets from somebody that I follow. This is Cinema Strikes Back, and their handle is @cinema_strikes. And I noticed a couple of pictures of ninjas, and this little tweet struck me. He said, yeah, you have to know how to handle the different elements, or you're definitely going to take a spear to the nuts or get stabbed in the water. And the picture that was there, and another picture in a separate tweet, had images of ninjas. This was obviously a 70s or 80s martial arts film. We've got 4 or 5 guys in the middle of the water on a small bridge, and some ninjas in blue flying out of the water with spears. And just his combination of words, the images that I saw, struck me with that current episode where I talked about that movie I had seen so many years ago. And so I realized that they were talking about the movie 5 Element Ninjas, or 5 Elements Ninjas, or Chinese Super Ninjas, or 5 Elemental Ninjas, as it's sometimes known. And that goes back to something I mentioned on that episode as well, where these names, who knows what name I watched this under as a kid. So I realized I have this and have had it on my Netflix watch list for a number of years, probably since possibly before I started doing Wake Up Heavy. And martial arts films are one of those things that I really enjoy, have a connection to with my childhood. It just becomes overwhelming sometimes, and how you watch it, with the dubbing, without, depends on the service, the length of the films. It never quite matches what's on IMDb, and that's because of the way these things were edited for foreign viewing. Again, all these things that I mentioned in passing in the last episode. And I checked this against the time on IMDb, and it seemed about the same. Figured, what the heck? I had watched the One-Armed Boxer a few days prior and enjoyed that one. That was on Amazon Prime, and it was dubbed. And unfortunately, I couldn't change that. On Netflix, there seems to be some more flexibility. All the martial arts films that I've watched there have given me the option to, I think all of them, if not most of them. I know when I watched the 36th Chamber of Shaolin, I was able to watch it subtitled with the original voices. And so I did that with this film, 5 Elements Ninjas, which is how they have it on Netflix. And pretty soon after I started the film, I started to feel some of those memory receptors being hit. And as it progressed, I just kept thinking, you know what? I definitely saw this one as a kid. I don't want to go into too much detail about the plot here, because that's not what this episode is about. But here's a little clip from the movie to clue you in on what the 5 elements are, at least.
This here is a challenge note.
The 5 elements? What does it have to say about that?
The note mentions gold, wood, water, fire, and earth, indicating 5 locations for our warriors to meet there.
What is this, ninja?
I'm not familiar. I know it's a samurai skill.
As happens a lot in these films, we have these different battles between the students of this one school versus these 5 elements. And as those 5 elements were being introduced and the fights were happening, I was like, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember the gold fighting. They had these spinning hats that were used to confuse the other fighters, and these little blades that shot out. And I was like, oh man, yeah, seems very familiar to me. Kind of like how when I watched Visiting Hours,
It's time for another tangent.
And had the recollection of a few of those scenes really, really hit. And that's what really struck me while I watched this, is that memory of this film wasn't sharp memories. And like that Visiting Hours thing, it took a while for it to pop out, which is a little different than, say, something like Frankenstein Created Woman, where the images in my head matched accurately with my rewatch of that years later after discovering what the film was and thinking, I remember that so clearly. It's also akin to the essay that I have on my blog about tracking down a comic book that I had read in my early teens, probably my tweens, on a trip to Portland, Oregon, and stumbling across that thanks to Instagram. And that was, again, around the time of my start with Wake Up Heavy. And so I'll link that in this episode show notes for you to go read. It's the same kind of thing where the images were there. They stuck with me for years. Seeing them again was just like being back at that time. And yet some of the other stuff was kind of muddled. So as I'm sitting through Five Element Ninjas and going, okay, I know I saw this, but is it that movie? And it didn't take too long to get to the Earth Element scene. I watched it in great anticipation and discovered, okay, this is the movie with the ninjas that I talked about on the last episode. But it's a little bit different than how I described it and how you heard at the beginning of this episode. So this doesn't happen in trees. This happens on the ground, and the Earth Element ninjas are under the ground, and they're poking their spears up through the ground and into the legs of this fighter from this martial arts school. And so I still wasn't convinced, but after a short while, as he strains against their spears, something starts to hang down out of his shorts. And I was like, holy shit, this is it. And it continued for a while. The fight goes on for a bit, as they do in these films. Towards the end, that viscera hangs down to the ground and gets stepped on. And I looked at it and I thought, okay, who knows what I thought this was as a kid? Is it tendons? Is it muscle? Is it guts? And I honestly think, and this kind of goes back to the quote I read earlier, that it's this guy's testicles.
That doesn't sound right.
And I just want to pause there so all the men that are listening can take a breath. They don't mention that in the film, but by the look of it, I think that's what they were going for. I could be totally wrong. Now, as to my memory, there is fighting in trees. There is wire flying or wire acting or wire foo, as it's sometimes called. Is adding foo to everything a little bit culturally or racially insensitive? I feel that way when I say it. That's why I've been avoiding kung fu on this episode and saying martial arts instead. I don't even know if that's appropriate anymore. Maybe it's just that it's a little close to kung flu, and we don't want that right now.
China. Fuck Donald Trump.
There is wire acting. There is a tree element, and those fights are pretty amazing. And we go through these elements all again at the end of the film when the hero of the movie has to go and do battle, and he finds these 3 or 4 other guys to help him along the way. I do maintain the possibility that I am conflating it with another movie that I watched back then that had a possible tree fight with the similar situation where some viscera comes hanging down. But I kind of think I just got these scenes mixed up in my head and combined them in my memory. Which again goes back to this comic book that I mentioned. I thought there was another story in the same comic, and it turns out it was probably in a different issue of that comic or a completely separate comic. So, again, my memory. But back to Five Elements Ninjas. I highly recommend it. Watch it subtitled if you can. The voice over acting is pretty awful.
Japanese samurai are as brave as the Chinese. I'll use another sword. Please wait for me.
That's a whole nother thing, but in some of these martial arts films, the American guys that they got to do these do the strangest voices, and I will never understand why. We'll watch it either way. It's kind of fun, I guess, with that. It sort of takes me out a little bit, even more so than Italian horror movies. You do have the option of watching it subtitled, and I kind of enjoy doing that now as an adult. Oh, one thing I wanted to mention about memory is that I watched Five Elements Ninjas, and I thought, okay, this is the movie. I need to go back and find these tweets from this guy, because it's what prompted me to watch the film, and my brain was telling me that I had seen the tweets sometime after I released last week's episode. And when I found them, I realized that I had read them earlier that day. So that tells you something about my memory or my lack thereof. And I was convinced that that had happened at least 3 or 4 days earlier than it had. Take anything I say based on my memory with a grain of salt. Okay, that is pretty much all I wanted to get to on this. See, we kept it really short. This may be the shortest thing I've ever done for Wake Up Heavy. I watched a film with my daughter that I wanted to discuss with her, but she was playing her Sims game.
That doesn't sound right.
During almost all of it, so I don't know if we'll get to that. I also have another idea based on a big film that's coming out next week on March 31st that we might get to. I still want to do something with her soon. I have a follow-up, actually, and the second follow-up to the last episode that is based on actual TV shows that I watched as a kid. And again, this kind of culminates a lot of things that I have mulled over in my brain while doing Wake Up Heavy over the last couple of years. So I think I'm going to get to that before anything else. And I'll do watch list and news and notes and stuff for that episode. Thank you so much for indulging me with this. I thought everyone would be curious to know that I found that movie, and I found it rather quickly. All right, thanks for listening. Have a great week. Stay safe, be smart. Get in line for your vaccine as soon as you're able.
And don't forget, anything can happen when you wake up heavy.